One of the core things that separates tabletop RPG writing from fantasy writing is the amount of narrative control the writer keeps for themselves. Authors usually write their novels on their own. They make all the calls for each of their characters and decide how the story unfolds. This isn't the case with game masters, as we aren't the only storytellers in our games. Instead, the story is the result of a team effort, and we get to discover it together with our players. It is a beautiful process which has numerous benefits, but it comes with its own set of unique challenges. For example, an author could retroactively edit a chapter that didn't have the impact they desire. That's because their creation is the story as a whole and not a single chapter or moment. But GMs can't do that. Once a scene has passed, it becomes canon. Our readers have read it, so we cannot change it in editing like an author could. In fact, I shouldn't even use the term readers when it comes to tabletop RPGs. A reader of a novel cannot affect the narrative, they simply experience it. In tabletop RPGs, we encourage the players to take action and interact with the world around them. Through these interactions, players become writers of the story as well. Because of this collaborative nature, one of the biggest challenges game masters face is that the players' choices are hard to predict. So it's very difficult to prepare a plot for a tabletop RPG, because we can't assume that the players will choose to follow a specific course of action. So how do we cope with all that uncertainty and still create a compelling story? Worry not, we're going to touch on that question several times throughout this chapter. But first, let's dive deeper and understand the meaning of the player's choices by learning about the term known as player agency. Player agency is the power or capacity of the players to act independently within the game and make meaningful choices. Acting independently means the players have control over the character's decisions and actions. One of the fastest ways to kill a campaign is by taking the agency away from the players. If one of the players wants to kill a goblin, and we tell them they can't because their character wouldn't do that, we effectively took away their agency. That player is no longer in control of their character's actions. What about meaningful choices? What makes a choice meaningful? What do you think? Pause the video and take a moment to come up with your answer. A meaningful choice is one that has consequences. For example, the characters want to cross a valley but learn that a vicious dragon lords over it. The players choose to go around the valley in order to avoid the dragon. If the dragon attacks them regardless, we have essentially told them that their choice didn't matter. Games with very low agency are usually not fun to play in. In fact, the tabletop RPG community coined the term railroad for such games. The term is used pejoratively to describe games where the players can't really stray from what the GM had planned. In such games, there is a right choice for every problem, because the wrong choice will always encounter resistance. So imagine you are playing in a classic D&D game and try to leave the dungeon. As you do, an invisible wall appears to block your path. You then continue down the hall, slay a monster, and reach a room with 2 doors. One of them is locked. You have a spell that opens locked doors, but for some reason it fails, leaving you with only one real option to continue. You get the point. The plot of a railroad game is easy to plan. We know exactly which scenes are going to happen and in what order. But unless the players make the exact choices we intended them to, which never happens, they will feel a lack of influence in this so-called collaborative story. What happens if we do the exact opposite? What if we try to give the players as much freedom as possible? That would create a game known as a sandbox, a game where the players have the most agency. We do not assume anything about the players' choices in a sandbox game, and will not push them to pick anything. A true sandbox game has no pre-planned plot. That's because a plot always assumes something about the choices of the player characters. That's why this type of game requires more effort, because without the ability to plan a plot, we could not anticipate what we'll need to prepare for any given session. That means we'll have to do a lot more world building to accommodate that style. And even then, we will have to improvise extensive parts of each gaming session. While the freedom that sandbox games offer sounds tempting at first, these games can feel a bit directionless. The players will often feel baffled by having so many options and possibilities, and it's very likely that they'll have to stop and think, what do we do next? Without the Game Master's direction, only a group of experienced players who knows how to motivate themselves can navigate the sandbox game in a satisfying manner. Now, we've talked about the difference between a railroad and a sandbox, but most games don't fall directly into one category or the other. It is actually a scale, and most games are somewhere between these two ends. In fact, a single campaign can move closer to one end or the other as the setting changes. An adventure that takes place in an underground dungeon can be more railroady, while a day of exploration in the city can feel more like a sandbox. Okay, let's play a game. I'll give you a scenario that happens in a game, and you'll have to think about whether it makes the game more of a railroad or a sandbox. Ready? One of the characters' relatives ask for the party's help to locate their missing son. What do you think? In this case, it would be more of a railroad, because we had an NPC ask the party to do something directly, pushing them towards a specific course of action. Next scenario. We give our players a world map that they can explore. Is that a sandbox or a railroad? The answer is sandbox. Giving the players a map shows them that the world around them exists and that they can explore any part of it should they want to. Okay, third scenario. When the characters reach town, they encounter a notice board with several job opportunities. Does this feel more like a railroad or a sandbox? Having multiple options creates the feeling of a sandbox. By choosing one job over the other, they choose their own story. Last scenario. Ready? The characters reach a new town and encounter multiple upset NPCs. They all tell the party that children go missing at night. The local guard demands to question the newcomer adventurers, perhaps suspecting that they are the culprits. At night, a shadowy silhouette of a little girl appears and beckons the characters to follow it. Is that more of a sandbox or a railroad? That one's a bit tougher, isn't it? But notice that we have actively highlighted the same issue over and over, creating tension around it and hinting the players that they should investigate it further. So this would be more of a railroad, but this feels less controlling than some of the examples we've had earlier, right? Even though the term railroad is used pejoratively, some amount of railroading is acceptable and even necessary. This is especially true in one-shot adventures like the one you'll create in this course. In such games, the players will have less choice about what they want to accomplish, but they could still have several options on how to accomplish it. We'll talk a lot more about one-shot design in Chapter 7, but for now, I want you to reflect a little more about player agency. Take a look at the worksheet for this chapter. In the collaborative storytelling section, reflect on a game you have either played in or watched. Was the story more of a railroad or a sandbox? What did the GM do to make it feel that way? After you're done reflecting, jump over to the next lesson where we will learn how to come up with new story ideas for your games. See you there!